By the end of the 1990s, George Carlin had mostly stopped acting in favor of pursuing comedy-related endeavors, but he didn't do it out of a love for comedy. His real reasons were ruinous. George Carlin went from clean-cut comic in the 1960s to the countercultural icon of the 1970s. He spent the rest of his years being nothing less than his true self. Or so audiences thought. For all his brash language and risque confessionals, Carlin was still keeping secrets back home. George Carlin was born in New York City on May 12, 1937. His beginning was no laughing matter. His mother, Mary, was terrified of his violent father, Patrick, and had already seen how awful he was to George's older brother, Patrick Jr. So, gathering up her courage, she escaped their house via the fire escape one night with her sons in tow, never looking back. Even after all of that, Carlin's formative years were still full of pain. When he was 8, Carlin's absent father passed, and his relationship with his mother deteriorated soon after. He spent much of his childhood running away from home, smoking, and getting expelled from school before dropping out entirely. He was obviously struggling with how to place himself in the world. This only worsened as he grew up. Soon after leaving school, Carlin joined the Air Force, only it was also a disaster. During Carlin's short stint there, he got 3 court-martials, one for falling asleep on guard duty during a simulated mission, one for disobeying orders, and the third for disrespecting an NCO. He was eventually cut loose after 3 years. Carlin's young life was definitely wild, which only made his next move that much more surprising. Growing up, Carlin had always idolized comic actor Danny Kaye, and in 1959, he teamed up with Jack Burns to form a relatively successful comedy team. But it wasn't what you'd think. Far from Carlin's later countercultural routines, Carlin and Burns were clean-cut, wholesome-looking comics who told respectable jokes. Yet, even then, Carlin's personal life was anything but. After one of his shows with Burns in Dayton, Ohio, Carlin happened to notice a beautiful woman hanging out around the bar, waitress Brenda Hosbrook. Less than a year after meeting Hosbrook, Carlin married her in June 1961 at her parents' home, and their marital bliss was quickly followed by a daughter, Kelly, in 1963. Even better, during this time, Carlin's career, now a solo one without Burns, was taking off, and he made regular appearances on a variety show, his hair still close-cropped and his face clean-shaven. But appearances can be deceiving. Carlin delighted in being a father to Kelly and loved to spend time with her, introduce her to new music, and watch animal shows with her, where, according to Kelly, he would do all the voices and it was way more entertaining than the actual show. Still, even though Carlin loved to participate in Kelly's upbringing, he had a lot of growing up to do himself. He often indulged in substances in his daughter Kelly's presence, rolling papers in front of her and teaching her to do the same. Kelly also recalled making cakes with her father, where he would bring out a baggie for Daddy's spiced cakes, and have his little girl mix them in for him. Evidently, Carlin didn't want to hide this side of himself from his family. In fact, he didn't want to hide it from the world. In the early 1960s, while still working with Jack Burns, Carlin and his comedy partner decided to go see Lenny Bruce, the shock comic of the day. As Burns later related, although they were both blown away by Lenny's willingness to be candid about what most people in the 1960s considered scandalous, from substance use to profanity, it was an epiphany for George Carlin. He knew he wanted what Lenny had, but he also witnessed firsthand what it cost. In December of 1962, Carlin was in the audience of a Chicago nightclub where Bruce was taken in by officers for obscenity. His reaction was pitch perfect. Officers began detaining audience members for questioning and asking for identification. But when they got to Carlin, he cheekily told them he didn't believe in government-issued ID. This didn't go down well. Irritated at Carlin, the officers detained him along with Lenny Bruce, and Carlin's path to infamy was beginning. By 1968, Carlin, still suited up and conventional, had reached even bigger heights of fame. He had released his first comedy album, frequently guest hosted on The Tonight Show, and appeared in the CBS comedy Away We Go. He was now making enough money for a comfortable existence in Beverly Hills, and continued to experiment with substances when his audience wasn't looking. The trouble was, his wife Brenda was getting into darker, deeper danger all the while. Brenda, often home alone with their daughter, and with little to do during the days, began drinking more and more heavily. Carlin became so concerned about it that he even barred Brenda from getting a pilot's license she desperately wanted for fear that she would do irreparable harm to herself and any passengers. It sowed the seeds for a world of pain later on. But for now, Carlin took on almost no warnings for himself. In 1969, George Carlin had the most transformative experience of his life. After decades mostly just with his baggie of buds, he dropped a tab of harder stuff and claimed it changed his life. As his daughter related, Carlin called the experience a values changer, and he was able to see that he was in the wrong place. America didn't know it, but they were about to get an entirely new George Carlin. Carlin now took the biggest risk of his career. Spurred by his memory of Lenny Bruce's bravery and his new spiritual experience, Carlin grew his hair and beard out, displayed ear piercings, and switched out his old suits for ratty shirts and blue jeans. Then he changed up his comedy routine entirely, reveling in discussions of politics, religions, substances, and anything taboo. The consequences were immediate and devastating. To say Carlin's regular audience was betrayed by his new look and style was an understatement. Crowds fled from the comedian they felt they couldn't understand. According to one reporter, his revenue, once $250,000 a year, dropped a staggering 90% after his makeover. Many in the world thought he made the biggest mistake of his life, but Carlin didn't give up. He wasn't just determined to win the public back over, he also believed in himself and the changes he was making. So faced with crumbling ticket sales, he hired a crack management team to better sell his new image, and simply started out all over again in smaller clubs with younger crowds who would be more receptive of his true self. It paid off, but it also taxed him. It took 2 long years, but Carlin managed to win over mainstream audiences again when his comedy record FM and AM came out. The album cleverly split its material, showing his pre-1970s kind of comedy on the AM side, and his new comedy on the FM side. It was the perfect gateway into the new Carlin, and he was the hit once more. Only, Carlin was never comfortable with comfort. He now pushed the boundaries even further. Around the time the FM and AM came out, Carlin became utterly infamous for 7 reasons. He began perfecting his 7 dirty words routine, immortalized most famously on his record Class Clown, where he brazenly lists off 7 swear words you can't say as a public figure, or as he put it, the ones that'll infect your soul, curve your spine, and keep the country from winning the war. On July 21st, 1972, Carlin performed his 7 dirty words routine at Milwaukee's Summerfest. When he walked off the stage that day, officers immediately arrested him for the set, charging him with violating obscenity laws. For Carlin, as it had been for Lenny Bruce, the uproar was just an indication that he was doing something right, but the authorities never let him enjoy it.
That there are just some words, not many either, just a few, that we've decided, well, we won't use them.
Although the Milwaukee case against Carlin was eventually dismissed for being, if indecent, not strictly obscene, Carlin would go on to face multiple charges and complaints about the routine for the rest of his life, tallying up to a total of 7 arrests. Each time, he never backed down and continued to perform the routine, even adding to and tweaking the words as it went on. Then again, George Carlin never did know how to stop, until tragedy forced him to. In 1976, at the height of his career, Carlin suddenly disappeared from the stage, and stopped doing stand-up for 5 long years. The reason why was harrowing. He admitted only much later that he had suffered a heart attack during this period, with the medical scare keeping him from live audiences even as he now began a long and successful series of taped specials with HBO. Considering what was going on with Carlin at the time, it's surprising his heart didn't quit entirely. Carlin's substance habits went from mild or moderate to utterly extreme during the 1970s, with one of his label mates, Kenny Rankin, admitting that there was so much of it readily available on Carlin's private jet or elsewhere on tour that he suffered a relapse. At the time, Carlin was particularly into powder rather than grass, something that couldn't have helped his heart. But then there was his marriage. Carlin's career had made a fantastic surge during the 1970s, but his relationship with Brenda Hosbrook took a nosedive. Her drinking worsened significantly, and combined with Carlin's own habits, their love turned into a near-lethal concoction. Tragically, they couldn't seem to keep it together for their now pre-teen daughter, Kelly. In fact, Carlin's characteristic openness about his substance use turned into a nightmare for his little girl. By this time, Kelly had been around her parents long enough to understand their every mood, hangover, and withdrawal symptom, and she watched carefully to make sure their days would never go from shaky to horrible. As she later put it, walking on eggshells doesn't even begin to explain it. At times, she even had to take an active role in sobering her parents up. In her memoir, Kelly Carlin described one particularly doomed family holiday to Hawaii, where Brenda and George began fighting because George wouldn't share his stash he had with Brenda, who liked to partake alongside her drinking. The argument devolved into divorce threats and petty complaints, and then it hit a terrifying climax. Strung out and fed up with each other, Brenda and George, in front of Kelly, picked up kitchen knives and turned them to each other. Their daughter's response was heartbreaking. The 11-year-old put herself between them, partially diffusing the situation, and made her parents sign a peace treaty, begging them to stop using and fighting for the rest of the trip. Sadly, it didn't last a day. George and Brenda's worst moments, however, happened closer to home. Around this time, Carlin's mother, with whom he'd always had an unstable relationship with, came for a prolonged stay at the family home. It only introduced more family dysfunction. Reportedly, the matriarch would spend most of her time insulting Carlin while secretly pouring Brenda drink upon drink. It led to a rock bottom, with her drinking issues increasing for years and now pulled into painful focus with the enabling of Carlin's mother. Brenda Hosbrook was soon hospitalized for her alcoholism. It was a moment of reckoning, and when she got out, she told Carlin she wouldn't move back to their house until his mother moved out. It became a turning point for Carlin, too. George Carlin was nothing if not honest, and after Brenda's ultimatum, the first thing he did was inform his mother of the deal. He booked her flight back to New York and dropped her off at the airport. It likely saved Brenda's life, but it also saved their marriage. After this, Carlin and his wife partly confronted their addiction and greatly improved their relationship. Yet, in some ways, the damage was done. In the 1980s, Carlin branched out into acting with several memorable roles, including his 1987 turn as a hippie drifter in the comedy Outrageous Fortune, then as the time traveler Rufus in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in 1989.
Greetings, my excellent friends.
In 1991, he took over from Ringo Starr playing Mr. Conductor on the classic TV children's show Shining Time Station, a far cry from his countercultural image. His body, however, kept sending out warning signals. Carlin still used substances during this time, if likely less than before, and it all caught up with him. In 1982, he suffered yet another heart attack, and would go through another one in 1991. In defiance of this, Carlin still kept working, and performed almost yearly in HBO specials like Carlin at Carnegie. But his comedy was sending out warnings too. At the height of his fame, Carlin was known for takes on American politics and culture, turning out quips like, "That's why they call it the American dream, because you'd have to be asleep to believe it." And, "In America, anyone can be president, that's the problem." His comedy was irreverent, but somehow hopeful. Even his observations offended some people. But for some fans, Carlin's next evolution was too much, even for them. Just before his third heart attack, Carlin's comedy went through another transformation. He began wearing all black, growing his hair even longer and sweeping it into a ponytail, and joking about violence from bombings to beheadings. He would hone his dark, bitter style even more as the years went on, and soon his life was imitating art. During this phase of Carlin's career, his family got some devastating news. His wife, Brenda Hosbrook, had liver cancer. She died on May 11th, 1997, just one day before Carlin's birthday, and after all their work on their marriage. Reeling from the loss, Carlin was about to have an even more confusing experience. Just 6 months after his wife's passing, Carlin met comedy writer Sally Wade, and was astounded to discover it was love at first sight. But newly widowed and still processing, Carlin ran away from Wade, telling her that he needed to be alone for up to a year before he pursued anything romantic. Then he surprised her. After 8 months of not hearing from Carlin, Wade assumed he'd move on from what they'd had, and it was not meant to be. Then, one day, Carlin called her up and asked her out on a very belated date. It turned into much more. Soon after, they married in a private ceremony, just over a year after Brenda's passing. But if Wade thought she was getting a more stable Carlin, she was wrong. In the mid-1990s, George Carlin seemed to have it all: a namesake TV show, a retrospective hosted by Jon Stewart, and a hit hardcover book. But some of his proudest accomplishments had come from appearing in films. After his role in The Prince of Tides, it seemed like he was set for a future in cinema, only for Carlin to walk away from it all. He spent years on the road doing the comedy circuit, but he didn't do it out of the love of it. Years later, Carlin admitted, thanks in part to his struggles with addiction, he owed mountains of money to the IRS, as he'd neglected to pay his taxes. Carlin said, because of my abuse of substances, I neglected my business affairs and had large arrears with the IRS, and that took me 18 to 20 years to dig out of. I did it honorably, and I didn't begrudge them. I don't hate paying taxes. I'm not angry at anyone, because I was complicit in it. In the new millennium, Carlin began headlining frequently in Las Vegas, including a run at the MGM Grand Las Vegas in 2004. Still pushing the boundaries with his newer, darker comedy, one day his show went off the rails. The audience at that night didn't take kindly to his bombs and beheadings routine, and Carlin didn't take kindly to them. Sensing the negative atmosphere in the room, Carlin couldn't manage to just grit his teeth and make it through the set. Instead, he began complaining that he couldn't wait to get out of Vegas and go back to where the real people are. He then heckled his own audience, saying, "People who go to Las Vegas, you gotta question their intelligence to start with. Traveling hundreds and thousands of miles to essentially give your money to a large corporation is kind of moronic." Carlin walked off the stage that night to more consequences than he'd felt in years. After the disastrous set, the MGM Grand unceremoniously fired Carlin. Then came the real shock. In the wake of the firing, his representatives soon announced that Carlin had gone into a rehab facility, of his own free will, to seek treatment for pain medication addiction and alcohol misuse. The set wasn't just bad that night, it was a symptom of Carlin's continuing personal issues. Over the next few years, a slew of confessions followed. Carlin had many come-to-Jesus moments in his life, but that night at the MGM Grand seemed to make one of the biggest impacts. In a 2005 show following the infamous set, Carlin told the audience he had now been sober just shy of a year, and in 2008 he gave a bare-all interview admitting his addictions to alcohol and pain medication, while also indicating that other substances had helped him through his life.
The drug and alcohol thing, it seems to me, comes down to this. Drugs and these things are wonderful. They're wonderful when you try.
Sadly, time was running out on that life. Starting from the early 2000s, Carlin's heart issues popped back up again with a vengeance, leading to a surgery in 2003 and another episode of heart failure in 2005. Only in his 60s, Carlin must have worried for his future, but he still had a sense of humor about it. Carlin continued working through these health scares, going on stage and performing for people in gig after gig. One day, his publicist saw the horrible cost to Carlin. While hanging out backstage, Carlin lifted his shirt for the publicist, jokingly to show him the result of all of these heart surgeries. The publicist said his chest looked like a science project. In the end, Carlin didn't really know when to give up, and he kept right on going until he practically couldn't. In the summer of 2008, Carlin was 71 years old and still dealing with health issues, but nonetheless put on a performance at the Orleans Hotel and Casino in early June. This would be his last show. On June 22, 2008, Carlin's heart finally got him, and he perished from a fatal heart attack in Santa Monica, California. Despite his fame and semi-public health issues, many were still shocked and saddened at the loss of such a vital force in comedy. Apparently, though, Carlin had been ready, and his last wishes were perfect. As part of his will, Carlin had his body cremated, and stipulated that his ashes should be scattered at the fronts of a collection of New York City nightclubs where he had first started in comedy. It was a touching tribute to his life, but there was one thing missing from his demands. True to his irreverent, stripped-down character, Carlin insisted that there be no funeral for his remains. Instead, he only asked his wife Sally Wade and his daughter Kelly host a small party at his home, where friends and family could share stories of the life he'd had. George Carlin was far from perfect, and he'd be the first to tell you so. His irreverent, sometimes edgy humor didn't always land, but most of it found his audience in the end. Perhaps more importantly, although he was cynical, he was always reaching for more. After all, as he once said, scratch any cynic and you'll find a disappointed idealist. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.